Picture this, a broke 18-year-old stealing leftover food from corner shops just to survive. Fast forward a decade and that same young man strolls into the set of the Dragon's Den as its youngest ever investor, a self-made millionaire by just 23 years old. One moment he's foraging for loose change to keep his hunger at bay, the next moment he's the diary of a CEO star. How on earth did we get here? This is a story about a university dropout with no money and no connections, transformed into a media mogul and dragon, seemingly against all odds. We're about to unravel Stephen Bartlett's journey, from his humble beginnings and big risks to his meteoric rise and the harsh realities that came with it. So how did he do it, and why does this story matter? Let's dive in. Introduction. The early days. Stephen Bartlett wasn't born into fame and fortune, far from it. He was a university dropout with zero network and very little in his pockets. Yet in a few short years, he built a multi-million-pound company, became one of the youngest dragons in UK history, and amassed a social media empire of over 10 million followers. And it matters because it challenges the traditional rules of entrepreneurship. Now, why should you care? Because Bartlett's rise is much more than just a one-man success story. It's a window into the new era of business. It shows how social media, relentless hustle, and an unorthodox mindset can rewrite the playbook for young entrepreneurs. He's become a role model for an entire generation that doesn't always see themselves in boardrooms or on TV. If he could do it, a black kid born in Botswana, raised in a working-class British town, what does that say about opportunities in the 21st century? This documentary-style deep dive will explore exactly that, step by step. Act 1. The Underdog. Stephen Bartlett's story begins far away from cameras and boardrooms. He was born in 1992 in Botswana, the youngest of 4 kids to a Nigerian mother and an English father. When Stephen was 2, his family relocated to Plymouth, England, hoping for a better life. But instead, they found themselves in a mostly white, middle-class town, and the Bartletts struggled financially. Stephen's mom had left school at age 7 and couldn't read or write. His dad was a hard-working engineer. Money was always tight. My parents had no money. I'd be lucky to get a card on my birthday, Stephen later recalled. There were no fancy holidays, sometimes not even Christmas presents. That feeling of being left without lit a fire in Stephen at a very early age. Growing up as one of the only black kids in the neighborhood, Stephen often felt like an outsider. He watched his parents grind through multiple jobs, his father working in construction during the day and his mother running a small corner shop by night. She would sometimes even sleep on a bag of rice in the back of that shop to guard it from vandals who targeted her for being virtually the only black woman around. Young Stephen saw all of this. He learned that if he wanted anything in life, it wasn't going to be handed to him. If I was going to have stuff in my life, it was going to be down to me. He barely got through the classes, being more interested in making deals than making grades. By his mid-teens, he was organizing student trips and brokering vending machine deals on campus, taking a cut of the profits. At just 17 years of age, that exact hustler mentality got him into big trouble. He was expelled from his school in 6th form, which was his final year. But very soon in a twist, the school unexpelled him soon after, largely because Stephen's schemes were actually making the school money. Yes, you heard that right. The headmaster admitted years later that they welcomed him back because his vending machine deals brought him cash. Now, it was clear that conventional rules didn't suit Stephen, and Stephen didn't suit them either. By age 18, Stephen's path was diverging sharply from his peers. In 2010, he enrolled in a business management course at Manchester Metropolitan University, seemingly the right thing to do, but it didn't last long, because soon after he made a very bold decision. He dropped out, with no degree, no money, and no safety net. But still, Stephen decided to bet on himself. It was super risky. Friends and family, understandably, were baffled, but Stephen saw something that others didn't, an opportunity to do things differently. Act 2, the risk. Dropping out of university was just step 1. Now, Stephen had to make something out of that gamble. In Manchester, he holed up a small bedroom, reportedly above a pizza shop, and started plotting his first venture. His initial idea was an online student community called Wall Park, basically a digital notice board where college students could buy and sell items or advertise events. Unfortunately, it wasn't a breakthrough success, but it was real experience. Stephen was teaching himself how to build a website, grow an audience, and most importantly, hustle for every inch of progress. In his early years, he failed at the majority of his projects, but every single failure taught him something. He was learning by doing, fueled by instant noodles and audacious dreams. Around 2014, that Stephen stumbled across an idea that would change his life: social media marketing. This was the Wild West era of social media. Brands didn't yet know how to speak the language of tweets and memes, but Stephen and his friends did. Sensing an opportunity, 21-year-old Stephen teamed up with fellow dropout Dominic McGregor, and together they launched a scrappy startup called Social Chain. The concept was simple, yet very groundbreaking. They would build huge followings on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, fan pages about student life, humor, travel, music, and then use those viral channels to help brands reach young audiences in authentic ways. No one had quite done anything like this before. In the beginning, Social Chain was pure chaos. Picture a tiny Manchester office crammed with cheap IKEA desks, laptops, and a very youthful team running on caffeine and conviction. Stephen was the CEO, yes, but there was no playbook. They were literally just making things up as they went along. Their strategy? Do whatever it takes to create a buzz online. They secretly set up dozens of themed Twitter accounts, think like student problems or funny meme pages, and amassed millions of followers. Then when a client came on board, Social Chain would unleash a flurry of viral posts across all of these accounts at the same time, dominating young people's feeds and sending whatever message or product trending. It was basically guerrilla marketing, digitally supercharged. And it worked. Stephen, the once penniless college dropout, suddenly found himself at the helm of a fast-growing social media agency. At first, he paid himself almost nothing, pouring everything back into the company. He slept on couches, ate very cheap sandwiches, and did whatever it took to keep the dream alive. But within just a few years, momentum was on their side. Big brands started to take notice of this bold young team that could make any hashtag viral on command. By age 22, Stephen started to sign deals with global companies. The risks that he took started to pay off. The university dropout was becoming a real CEO. Still, success was far from guaranteed in those early days. Social Chain's approach was new and unproven, and sometimes even the unethical lines got very blurry. The team even got flagged for allegedly plagiarizing viral content from the web to fuel the pages. Money also was tight, and there were moments where the whole thing nearly imploded. But Stephen's knack for storytelling and publicity kept him afloat. He started vlogging his entrepreneurial life, filming himself hustling, traveling, and making deals. And those vlogs attracted even more fans to the Social Chain ethos. By basically wearing his journey on his sleeve, Stephen was not just building a business, he was building a personal brand. And that brand would soon become one of his most powerful assets. Act 3, the Breakout. In just a few short years, the Social Chain went from a project in the bedroom to a global marketing phenomenon. The company's growth was meteoric. By 2017, Social Chain had hundreds of employees in multiple countries running campaigns for the likes of Apple, McDonald's, the BBC, you name it. His Instagram showed him jetting around between New York and London, closing deals and partying at industry events. The very picture of a young modern CEO. In 2019, at just 26 years old, Stephen took the company public via a merger on the German stock exchange with an initial valuation north of $200 million. A couple years later, the Social Chain AG was being valued at nearly $600 million. It's the kind of success that most founders only dream of, achieved by someone who a few years prior was literally stealing food to eat. But here's where the whole story takes a very unexpected turn. At his apparent peak, right at Social Chain hit a massive scale, Stephen Bartlett chose to walk away. In 2020, he shocked his team and investors by stepping down as CEO of the company. Officially, it was because he didn't agree with the new direction of the business. Unofficially, Stephen had something else in mind. Something a lot bigger. His very own media empire. He was already working on other projects. One of them was a very simple audio show he'd started back in 2017, recorded on his iPhone. Funny thing is, little did anyone know, that podcast was about to become a cultural phenomenon. Stephen poured all of his energy into DOIC, turning what began as a raw personal monologue into in-depth interviews with world-famous guests. We're talking celebrities, artists, athletes, even former prime ministers, all sitting down for a brutally honest long-form conversation with Stephen. By the early 2020s, DOIC has grown into one of the most listened to podcasts on the planet. Ranking in Spotify's global top 5 in 2024, it passed 1 billion streams and was drawing 50 million listeners each month by late 2024. Those numbers put Bartlett in the elite ranks of digital creators worldwide. Suddenly, the kid who once couldn't pay for lunch was quite literally a voice in millions of people's ears. And then came the call from the BBC. In 2021, Stephen was invited to join the investor panel of Dragon's Den, the very show that had inspired his teenage entrepreneurial dreams. It pretty much felt like destiny. At 28 years old, he became the youngest dragon in the show's history, sitting shoulder to shoulder with his childhood business heroes. So here was a black, under 30 tech entrepreneur, a university dropout, no less, entering a club traditionally reserved for gray-haired titans of the industry. If you flipped on morning television or scrolled through LinkedIn, It was very hard to miss him, and still is. The DOIC podcast kept climbing and attracting even bigger guests and signing lucrative deals. And Stephen kept launching new ventures, a Web3 startup called Third Web, story to invest in the next generation of startups, even a new software platform for creators. Now in 2025, at 32 years old, Stephen's resume looks insane. Social media tycoon turned media mogul, dragon, author, and investor. So in the span of 1 decade, he'd gone from being completely ignored by the business establishment to becoming a defining voice within it. But of course, every meteoric rise casts a shadow, and Stephen was about to discover the other side of fame and success. Act 4. The realities. No rags to riches story is without its controversies, and Stephen's journey has plenty. As his personal brand grew, so did the scrutiny from the press, the public, and even regulators. He went from an underdog to a polarizing figure. So what are some of the knocks against Stephen? For starters, some of the media have questioned whether his image matches reality. In 2023, the New Statesman ran an exhortating piece dubbing Bartlett the Empire of Bluff, essentially accusing him of being more style than substance. In 2022, shortly after his Dragon's Den debut, the BBC quietly reprimanded Bartlett for breaching its strict advertising rules. He had worn a flashy necklace on the show, jewelry from a brand that he was affiliated with, effectively sneaking in an endorsement on a BBC program, which is a big no-no. Stephen then, of course, apologized and called it an oversight. But it was an early sign that the young Dragons was still learning the ropes of mainstream media. That same year, Britain's Advertising Standards Authority, or short, the ASA, clamped down on Stephen for plugging down Huel, a meal replacement drink that he plugged on his podcast, but while he was investing in it, without making it clear that it was an ad. They essentially told Stephen, if you're going to blur the line between genuine discussion and advertising, disclose it clearly next time. But it didn't stop there. In August 2024, 2 high-profile ads featuring Stephen, one for Huel again, and one for the health startup Zoe, were banned by the ASA for similar reasons. The authority said that these ads, which prominently showed Stephen's face, misled consumers by not properly declaring his financial interest. For someone whose personal brand is built on trust and transparency, these rulings were a massive blow. They painted the picture of an influencer CEO perhaps too eager to promote his portfolio companies without full honesty. The biggest controversy, however, hit at the core of his wildly popular podcast. In late 2024, a BBC investigation analyzed several episodes of the DOIC podcast and found an alarming pattern. On average, each episode contained about 14 false or misleading health claims made by guests, many of whom promoted alternative medicines or questionable wellness cures. Some guests spoke about miracle cancer treatments or anti-vaccine conspiracies, statements not backed by science. And Stephen, in his role as the interviewer, often gave minimal pushback, letting these claims just fly by. Now, this was a tricky moment because Stephen has built his brand on being a curious everyman, not a journalist. Stephen's production company issued a statement defending the show's openness to diverse opinions, essentially saying that they give the guests freedom of expression and trust listeners to draw their own conclusions. It was a very delicate PR dance, basically acknowledging the concerns without outright admitting fault. The very qualities that has made him popular, his informal, unfiltered style, could become liabilities when scaled to a massive audience. Today, his reputation is a mixed bag. He's seen as ambitious, motivational, and innovative, yes, but also very polarizing. Even the saga of his company, Social Chain, had been revisited with a critical lens. When the whole dust settled, the original UK branch of Social Chain was sold for a bargain £7.7 million in 2023, a very far cry from the £500 million. So what's the truth? Probably somewhere in between. Stephen is clearly a very talented entrepreneur and storyteller who clawed his way from nothing to extraordinary heights. But he's also human, and humans just make mistakes. In the end, the story of Stephen Bartlett isn't a straight hero's journey. It's a real, complicated portrait of modern success, warts and all. Conclusion and reflections. Stephen's rise from hungry dropout to media heavyweight leaves us with a lot to think about. For one, it's a testament to the power of unconventional paths. He didn't follow a single script, he tore it apart. In an era when anyone with Wi-Fi and a vision can build something, Stephen has proved that you don't need an elite education or deep pockets to make a mark.